The air was thick with the scent of death, a heavy, cloying presence that seeped into the very stones of the underworld. In the shadowy depths where the light of the sun could not reach, Nergal, the god of the underworld and war, sat upon his throne of bones, his dark eyes fixed on the flickering flames that danced along the walls of his infernal domain. The cries of the dead echoed through the halls, a constant reminder of his dominion over all that lay beneath the earth. But even in his kingdom of eternal night, the voices of the living could reach him. Marduk's summons had been clear, a command that could not be ignored. The giants had defied the divine order, and the balance of the world teetered on the edge of chaos. And Zeus' failure had left the divine race vulnerable, and it was now up to Nergal to restore order. Rising from his throne, Nergal's form shifted in the shadows, a towering figure clad in armor black as the void, his presence a storm of malevolent energy. His eyes glowed with an inner fire, the embodiment of war and death, and in his hand, he held a great scythe, its blade forged from the darkness between the stars. With a single thought, Nergal summoned his legion of divine warriors, spirits of vengeance and fury, who served him in both life and death. The warriors appeared before him, their armor gleaming in the dim light, their expressions grim and resolute. Among them were beings of great power: Ashur, the relentless warlord whose spear had never missed its mark; Kali, the fierce goddess of destruction, whose dance of death left nothing in its wake; and Ares, the blood-soaked god of war, whose fury was matched only by his thirst for battle. Nergal surveyed his legion with a cold, calculating gaze, his mind already turning towards the task at hand. The giants had proven themselves a formidable foe, and this battle would not be easily won. But Nergal was no stranger to war, and he relished the challenge. Ashur, Nergal's voice was a low, rumbling growl that echoed through the hall. You will lead the vanguard. Strike quickly and without mercy. Show the giants that there is no refuge from our wrath. Ashur nodded, his eyes narrowing with determination. They will not know what hit them, my lord. The giants will fall before our blades like wheat before the scythe. Kali, Nergal continued, turning to the goddess of destruction. You will follow Ashur. Sow chaos in their ranks, tear apart their defenses, and leave nothing but ashes in your wake. Kali grinned, her dark eyes glittering with a feral light. It will be my pleasure, Nergal. The giants will know the meaning of true destruction. Nergal's gaze shifted to Ares, who stood at the back of the legion, his hands clenched around the hilt of his sword. Ares, you will be our hammer. Strike with all your might, and break the giant spirits. Show them the futility of their defiance. Ares nodded, a grim smile tugging at the corners of his lips. They will beg for death before we are through with them. Satisfied, Nergal raised his scythe, the blade gleaming in the dim light. We march to war, my warriors. The giants have defied the gods, and for that, they will pay the ultimate price. Let us remind them why the underworld is a place of fear. With a deafening roar, the legion of divine warriors surged forward, their forms dissolving into shadows as they swept through the halls of the underworld and out into the world above. Nergal led them, his presence a dark cloud that blotted out the light, his eyes fixed on the distant mountains where the giants had made their camp. The battle begins. The giants had gathered in the highlands, their massive forms silhouetted against the sky as they prepared for the coming battle. Uthrog, the leader of the giants, stood at the forefront, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the approaching enemy. His kin, Svarog and Yakther, stood by his side, their expressions grim and resolute. The gods will come for us, Uthrog said, his voice a deep rumble that carried across the mountains. They will not let our actions go unpunished. But we are giants, born of the earth and the stone. We will stand against them, and we will fight with all our strength. Svarog grunted in agreement, his massive arms crossed over his chest. Let them come. We will crush them, just as we crushed the humans. The gods are no different, they bleed just like the rest. Yakther bared his teeth in a savage grin. I look forward to it. Let them try to take what is ours. But even as they spoke, a darkness began to spread across the sky, blotting out the light of the sun. The air grew cold, a chill that seeped into their bones, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. The giants tensed, their eyes narrowing as they realized that the gods had already arrived. From the shadows, Nergal emerged, his form a towering figure of death and destruction. The divine warriors flanked him, their eyes glowing with a fierce, unholy light as they advanced towards the giants. Uthrog, Nergal's voice was like the tolling of a funeral bell, deep and resonant. You have defied the gods, and for that, you will suffer. Surrender now, and I may yet show mercy. Resist, and I will bring the full force of the underworld upon you. Uthrog met Nergal's gaze without flinching, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. We are not afraid of you, Nergal, he growled. We will fight, and we will die if we must. But we will not bow to your will. Nergal's expression remained impassive, though there was a flicker of something dark and dangerous in his eyes. So be it, he said quietly. Let the battle begin. With a wave of his hand, Nergal unleashed his legion upon the giants. The divine warriors charged forward, their weapons flashing in the dim light as they clashed with the giants in a violent, chaotic melee. The Clash of Titans. The battle was a symphony of destruction, a cacophony of metal on stone, of roars and screams that echoed through the mountains. Ashur led the charge, his spear slicing through the air with deadly precision as he struck at the giants with relentless fury. Kali followed close behind, her movements a blur as she danced through the battlefield, her hands wreathed in flames that consumed all they touched. The giants fought back with equal ferocity, their massive fists smashing into the divine warriors with bone-crushing force. Sverig roared as he swung his great club, the weapon cleaving through the air with the power of a falling star. Yagther tore through the ranks of the divine warriors, his teeth bared in a savage snarl as he relished the taste of battle. But Nergal was everywhere, his presence a shadow that stalked the battlefield, his scythe reaping the souls of those who fell before him. He moved with a cold, calculating precision, his strikes swift and deadly, his eyes never leaving Uthrog. The battle raged on, the ground beneath them trembling with the force of the conflict. The giants were strong, their bodies forged from the very stone of the earth, but the divine warriors were relentless, their attacks coordinated and precise. For every giant that fell, a dozen divine warriors took their place, their determination unyielding. At the heart of the battle, Nergal and Uthrog clashed, their weapons meeting with a force that sent shockwaves through the air. Uthrog's massive axe struck with the power of a mountain, but Nergal's scythe was a weapon of pure darkness, cutting through the air with a deadly grace. You cannot win, Uthrog, Nergal hissed as he blocked another strike. The gods are eternal, their power infinite. You are nothing but a fleeting memory, a moment in the vastness of time. Uthrog snarled, his eyes blazing with fury. We are giants, Nergal. We are born of the earth, and we will not be so easily defeated. With a mighty roar, Uthrog swung his axe in a wide arc, aiming for Nergal's head. But Nergal was quick, his form dissolving into shadow as he dodged the blow, reappearing behind Uthrog with his scythe raised high. The blade of the scythe came down in a blur of motion, slicing through Uthrog's shoulder and leaving a deep, smoking wound. The giant staggered, pain coursing through his body, but he did not fall. Is that all you've got, Nergal? Uthrog growled, his voice thick with pain. You'll have to do better than that. Nergal's lips curled into a thin smile. Very well, he said softly. I will. With a surge of dark energy, Nergal attacked with renewed ferocity, his scythe flashing through the air like a streak of black lightning. Uthrog fought back with all his strength, his axe swinging in wide, powerful arcs, but it was clear that he was beginning to tire. The divine warriors pressed the attack from all sides, and though the giants fought with the strength of the earth itself, the relentless assault of the gods began to wear them down. Sverrig, his arms aching with the strain of battle, glanced over at Uthrog and saw the deep wound in his shoulder, the blood running in dark rivulets down his arm. Gritting his teeth, Sverrig let out a mighty bellow and charged toward Nergal, his massive club raised high. You'll not take our leaders so easily, god of the underworld, he roared, bringing his weapon down with all the force he could muster. Nergal, sensing the giant's approach, twisted away from Uthrog and turned to face Sverrig, his scythe meeting the giant's club with a resounding crash. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though the very ground beneath them might split apart from the force of the blow. But Nergal was unshaken. His eyes glowed with a fierce, unholy light as he pushed back against Svarog's strength, forcing the giant to take a step back. "You are brave, giant," Nergal said, his voice cold and cutting. "But bravery alone will not save you from the wrath of the gods." Svarog snarled, his muscles straining as he tried to overpower Nergal, but the god's strength was like an iron wall, unyielding and immovable. With a swift motion, Nergal twisted his scythe and sent Svarog's club flying from his hands, the weapon spinning through the air before crashing to the ground several yards away. Nergal's eyes locked onto Svarog's, and in that moment, the giant knew he was outmatched. But still, he did not retreat. "We are giants," Svarog spat, his voice filled with defiance. "We do not bow, and we do not break." Nergal's expression remained impassive, but there was a flicker of respect in his gaze. "Perhaps not," he murmured, "but you will fall." With a swift, lethal motion, Nergal's scythe slashed across Svarog's chest, leaving a deep, smoking wound that cut through flesh and bone alike. The giant staggered back, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but still, he remained on his feet. "Nergal!" Uthrog's voice rang out across the battlefield, filled with a mix of fury and desperation. "If you want to finish this, then face me. Leave my kin out of this." Nergal turned his gaze back to Uthrog, his expression unreadable. The battlefield around them was a scene of chaos. Giants and divine warriors clashed in a violent dance of death, the ground glittered with the bodies of the fallen. But in that moment, it was as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them, locked in a deadly contest of wills. "As you wish," Nergal said, his voice low and dangerous. "Let this be the end, Uthrog." With a roar, Uthrog charged at Nergal, his axe raised high, determined to strike the god down with all the strength he had left. The air around him seemed to vibrate with the force of his rage, and for a moment, it was as if the very earth itself rose up to aid him. But Nergal was ready. With a cold, calculated precision, he met Uthrog's charge head-on, his scythe flashing through the air in a deadly arc. The two weapons collided with a force that sent sparks flying in all directions, and for a brief moment, it seemed as though neither would give way. Then, with a twist of his wrist, Nergal deflected Uthrog's axe to the side, leaving the giant open to attack. In a blur of motion, Nergal's scythe swept upward, cutting deep into Uthrog's chest and sending the giant staggering back with a cry of pain. Uthrog's axe slipped from his grasp as he fell to one knee, blood pouring from the wound in his chest. The strength that had carried him through countless battles was finally failing him, and as he looked up at Nergal, he knew that this was the end. But still, there was no fear in Uthrog's eyes. Only a deep, unyielding resolve. "Do it," Uthrog growled, his voice hoarse with pain. "Finish it, Nergal. But know this, you may kill me, but you will never break the spirit of the giants." Nergal stood over Uthrog, his expression inscrutable as he gazed down at the fallen giant. The battlefield around them had fallen eerily silent, the clash of weapons and the cries of battle fading into the background as all eyes turned to witness the final moments of the fight. But Nergal did not strike. Instead, he lowered his scythe, his gaze fixed on Uthrog's defiant expression. "You are beaten, Uthrog," Nergal said, his voice low and cold. "But you have fought well. You have shown the gods that the giants are not to be underestimated." Uthrog's breath came in ragged gasps, his body trembling with the effort of staying upright. "So, is this how it ends?" he asked, his voice thick with bitterness. "You kill me, and the giants are left leaderless, broken by the gods?" Nergal was silent for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he considered the giant's words. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I will not kill you, Uthrog. The giants will not be broken this day." Uthrog's eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. "Why?" he finally managed to ask. "Why spare me, when you could so easily end this?" Nergal's gaze was cold, calculating. "Because a dead leader serves no purpose. The giants need someone to guide them, someone to ensure that they do not make the same mistake again. You are that leader, Uthrog. But understand this, if you defy the gods again, there will be no mercy. The next time we meet, it will be the end. Uthrog was silent, his gaze locked on Nergal's. The weight of the god's words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though the entire world had stilled, waiting for his response. Finally, Uthrog bowed his head, a gesture of both exhaustion and acceptance. I will abide by the pact, he said quietly. The giants will not rise against the gods again. But know this, Nergal, the day will come when the giants will no longer be content to live in the shadows. And when that day comes, there will be no peace between us. Nergal's expression remained impassive, though there was a flicker of something dark and unreadable in his gaze. That day is not today, he said simply. Remember your oath, Uthrog, and the giants may yet live to see it. With that, Nergal turned and walked away, his scythe held loosely at his side, his steps measured and deliberate. The divine warriors followed in his wake, their expressions grim but victorious, their weapons still dripping with the blood of the giants. Uthrog watched them go, his body trembling with pain and exhaustion. Sverig and Yakther moved to his side, their faces lined with concern as they helped their leader to his feet. We lost, Uthrog, Sverig said quietly, his voice filled with a deep, simmering anger. But we are not broken. The giants still stand. Uthrog nodded, his gaze distant as he stared out at the battlefield, littered with the bodies of the fallen. Yes, he murmured, we still stand. But we must learn from this. The gods are powerful, and we cannot afford to challenge them lightly. Yakther grunted in agreement, his teeth bared in a savage grin. Let them think they've won, he growled. We'll bide our time, grow stronger, and when the day comes, we'll crush them underfoot. Uthrog was silent for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as he considered Yakther's words. Perhaps, he said finally, but we must be patient. The giants have lost too much today. We cannot afford to lose more. With a heavy sigh, Uthrog turned away from the battlefield and began the long, painful trek back to their mountain home. The giants had been defeated, but they were not destroyed. They would rebuild, recover their strength, and in time, they would rise again. But for now, the world belonged to the gods. And in the shadow of that knowledge, the giants would wait, their spirits unbroken, their resolve hardened by the fires of defeat. The aftermath. The victory had come at a cost. The divine warriors, though triumphant, bore the marks of battle, armor dented, weapons dulled, spirits heavy with the weight of the lives they had taken. Nergal led them back to the underworld, where the darkness embraced them, wrapping around their weary forms like a shroud. In the great hall of the underworld, Nergal dismissed his warriors with a wave of his hand, his gaze distant and thoughtful. The battle had been won, the giants subdued, but there was no joy in the victory. Only a cold, lingering sense of inevitability. As the last of the warriors departed, Nergal remained alone in the hall, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the stone walls. His scythe rested against the throne of bones, its blade still stained with the blood of giants. Marduk's voice echoed through the silence, a commanding presence that filled the hall. Nergal, he said, his tone even but carrying the weight of authority. You have done well. The giants have been humbled, and the pact restored. Nergal bowed his head in acknowledgement, though his expression remained impassive. The giants were strong, but their strength was no match for the will of the gods. Uthrog has sworn to abide by the pact, and I believe he will keep his word, for now. Marduk's golden eyes gleamed in the darkness. For now, he repeated, his voice tinged with a note of caution. But we must remain vigilant. The giants are not easily broken, and they will not forget this day. Nergal nodded, his gaze distant. They will recover, as they always do. But they have learned that defying the gods comes at a great cost. It will be some time before they dare to challenge us again. Marduk's expression softened, though there was still a lingering tension in his gaze. You have done what needed to be done, Nergal. The balance has been maintained. But be wary, Tiamat's anger still burns, and the future is uncertain. We may have won this battle, but the war is far from over. Nergal's eyes narrowed, his thoughts turning to the goddess of wrath, whose grief for her brother Anzu had transformed into a deep and abiding hatred. Tiamat is dangerous, he said quietly. But she will not act rashly. She knows the consequences of defying the gods. Marduk nodded, though there was a note of unease in his gaze. Even so, we must be prepared for whatever may come. The world is changing, Nergal, and the old ways are being tested. We cannot afford to be complacent. Nergal met Marduk's gaze, his expression firm and resolute. I will be ready, Marduk. Whatever the future holds, the gods will not falter. The underworld will stand with you, as it always has. Marduk's gaze lingered on Nergal for a moment longer before he nodded, his expression softening. Very well, he said. Return to your domain, Nergal. Rest and recover your strength. The battles to come will test us all. With that, Marduk's presence faded, leaving Nergal alone in the silent hall. The god of the underworld and war stood motionless for a long moment, his thoughts churning with the events of the day. The battle had been won, the giants subdued, but the future remained uncertain, shrouded in the same darkness that filled his domain. But Nergal was not one to fear the unknown. He was the god of death and war, the guardian of the underworld, and he would face whatever came with the same cold, unyielding resolve that had carried him through countless battles. Turning away from the empty hall, Nergal moved through the shadows, his scythe in hand, the flames of the underworld burning around him. The darkness embraced him like an old friend, and as he descended deeper into his domain, he prepared himself for the challenges that lay ahead. For the gods, the victory over the giants was only a temporary reprieve. The world was changing, the ancient pacts strained by the weight of time, and the seeds of discord had been sown. But Nergal would be ready. He had faced the wrath of giants and emerged victorious, and he would face whatever came next with the same determination. In the darkness of the underworld, Nergal waited, his scythe gleaming in the firelight, his eyes burning with the promise of war. The future was uncertain, the path ahead shrouded in shadows, but Nergal would walk it without fear.